Welcome to this McGraw-Hill Education webinar, Classroom Management for Differentiating Instruction and Collaborative Practice. I'm Colleen Schumacher with McGraw-Hill Education, and I will be the webinar moderator for today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being presented in listen-only mode, which means that you'll be able to hear the presenter, but they won't be able to hear you. However, we want you to know that this doesn't mean that you cannot participate. We, of course, want to hear any questions that you have. So please just type those questions into the panel on your toolbar, the question panel. And what we will do is we will revisit those questions at the end of the session. Joining us today is national consultant, author, speaker, and trainer, Dr. Vicki Gibson. Dr. Gibson has extensive classroom experience working as a kindergarten teacher and learning disabilities specialist, and then moved on to open her own schools for students ages 2 through 12. Dr. Gibson holds 3 degrees, including her doctorate from Texas A&M University, where she also served as a lecturer and adjunct professor for 10 years. She is the author of numerous classroom resources and educational texts, including ones on differentiated instruction. So without further ado, I will pass this over to Dr. Vicki Gibson, who will be talking with us today about classroom management for differentiated instruction and collaborative practice. Dr. Gibson?
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for those of you that are working with us today. I want to begin with this, and this is some of the newest research. It's just basically a finding that learning takes place in the absence of disruption. And I think that the challenge for teachers, especially implementing standards-based instruction, is managing the flexible grouping so that they are experiencing less problems with behavior and can focus more time and attention on their instruction. The research on classroom management really reports nothing new recently. We already know that an organized environment significantly enhances and impacts student achievement. So my job today is basically, I want to talk to you about ways to structure that environment that are affordable and practical. They work, they're evidence-based, so that you can implement standards-based differentiated instruction and collaborative practice. And we'll talk a little bit about standards-based instruction. But what do we want classroom environments to do for us when we are teaching? We want to encourage self-regulation. So that means we need routines and procedures that students can follow and develop as daily habits for when they enter a classroom, so that we are focused more on instructional management, delivering content, providing collaborative practice and feedback, and less on environmental management. We want our environment to support our instruction. So assisting students with achieving the outcomes in the standards is going to require some changes in classroom practices. In other words, we're going to have to depart from some of our traditional habits if we are using mostly whole class lecture format for our delivery of this more rigorous content. And some of these changes in classroom practices in terms of teacher behavior and the way students practice are being called instructional shifts. That's just a fancy new name for differentiating instruction, which both of those indicate there's change in the way that we provide instruction in classrooms, whether it's a shift in your instruction or a different way that you produce teaching and practice methods. That's what differentiating instruction is. So let's look at these instructional shifts for standards-based instruction. And that may be a new term because a lot of people are using Common Core, standards, instruction, whatever. But honestly, we've had standards for as long as I can remember in education. We have always had state standards. So whether you are in a state that has adopted Common Core or a state that has their own standards or guidelines for outcomes at the end of the year, it's still standards-based instruction. And based on the evidence and the research, that instruction needs to shift so that we have an opportunity for students to receive explicit instruction and feedback in small groups. So looking at this diagram, beginning at the bottom, one of the instructional shifts is the way that the teacher will provide an overview, not a full lesson, but an overview of the big ideas and most important concepts or vocabulary words in whole class. You're not losing whole class. We're just going to make it very specific and identify what we will be talking about that particular day, not necessarily all week. I would introduce the big ideas and the important vocabulary words for that day, for that lesson, whether it is in English language arts, math or science, whatever the content area. We just want you to frame the puzzle, basically, create an outline of the big ideas and what you will be focusing on that day. And then break from whole group and use small group instruction for the teacher to be working with a group, and that small group isn't 3 to 5 students like we talked about in the reading initiative. That's for special ed targeted tier 3 interventions where your groups are smaller, but your groups may have 8 to 10 students in them or more if they're a group that is working on or beyond grade level. So one group or 2 groups will be working in collaborative practice while you are teaching a small group, and that will be on grade level, text complexity, explicit instruction with explicit feedback. And that collaborative practice is where students will be applying and developing skills, the speaking and listening standards, if you will, the collaborative conversations and the collaborative discussions. And that purpose for collaborative practice is just to enhance their comprehension and organize their word knowledge so that they can speak what they have been reading and thinking about, using that in complete sentences with good grammar before they would participate in a lot of written activities. Your grades will come out of that independent practice. So the big shift here to provide standards-based instruction is this opportunity for differentiating instruction in small groups, in teacher-led, explicit instruction and feedback, and that opportunity for students to have sufficient collaborative practice before they are expected to work independently and have their work graded. So what is differentiating instruction? A lot of people get this confused. Differentiating instruction is all about the teaching, not the content, not using a leveled reader or adjusting the activity. That is differentiating materials or content, not about activities that students may participate in. That's differentiating practice, but we're going to be talking about differentiating instruction. And what makes it different is this instruction will be specific to students' needs, and the feedback you provide will also be explicit to needs. And so that can only be provided in a smaller group that the students are grouped homogeneously or similar skill so that that teacher can target the purpose of that instruction and the point of that lesson and the outcome of that lesson, and closely monitor the student's response to instruction. That really is the first RTI, response to instruction. The second RTI is response to intervention, but every teacher, regardless of grade level or content level, or that whatever you're teaching, all of us will provide tier 1 instruction and closely monitor students' response to instruction, and then we will differentiate or change our teaching at the point of need based on what we see students doing in our small group. In other words, if I'm teaching something and I can see in the eyes and the behavior of the students in the group that they aren't comprehending that, I am monitoring their response to instruction, then I would adjust or differentiate at the point of need right then and provide more feedback or remodel something or explain something or engage in a conversation to enhance comprehension. So that's what differentiating instruction is. It is changing the teaching behavior at the point of need when you see your students are not understanding your communications and your instruction. So it's typically done in small groups, and then collaborative practice is mixed skill or heterogeneously grouped where the students are working where they can practice to enhance their comprehension, and because of that you would need to create variance in the collaborative practice groups. I try to have a good reader, a good talker, a good writer, or a student that can draw so that they could complete graphic organizers, drawing icons or labeling them, and then a good mama or daddy that'll tell me what's going on in that group. So I have a variance of skills assigned to my small groups for collaborative practice because I want them to help each other without disrupting or interrupting my teaching in small group where I'm working with a student. So initially, the assignments may be more project-based, or they may be more structured with text like a graphic organizer, so that students have a lot of guidance on what to do and what to talk about. What I typically see in classrooms as teachers assign collaborative practice, but every student has an individual written assignment, and because we have told students, get your work done, then they are more focused on completing the written component than they are engaging in the collaborative conversations that are purposed to help them get the language in their oral language expression before they try to write it. So you'll have to think about using the same materials possibly that you are currently using, but perhaps you encourage and teach and model how to participate in a collaborative activity. You could do that with either assigning 1 or 2 problems per student, then they all work their own sets of problems and then collaborate, copy, and share their information, or you could assign a project. So have our teachers been prepared for this instructional shift or this differentiating instruction using flexible grouping in small groups? And what the research is saying is no, they have not been prepared. There's a report, you see it on the screen, that came out in 2013 from the National Council for Teacher Quality, and they looked at all of, I think over 1,200 syllabi of our colleges, and what we were seeing from that is we are not providing the kind of professional development that teachers need to manage differentiating instruction and especially help them teach students how to participate collaboratively. So we do need professional development that will help us establish common classroom routines and procedures for school participation. And preferably, we would like to introduce and use these routines and procedures that would work in pre-K kindergarten and basically be the school behaviors for the remainder of their experience in classrooms. So let's talk about what some of those routines and procedures will be. The good news is that we do know what works. We have sufficient research and evidence for managing classrooms and student behaviors, and that's what I want to do today, is give you some of these key ideas that are evidence-based. So, number one, our target objective would be to establish routines that all students could follow once they enter a classroom doorway, regardless of grade level, regardless of age. So I'm going to walk you through some of these routines, how we would teach them on the younger end for students in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, and also explain how that could look all the way up through elementary and secondary. So once a student comes into a classroom doorway, here's what we want them to all do. Put away their personal belongings and check a business center. And I'm going to explain what that is and show you some visuals of that. We want them to check their mail. Just like you check your mail every day, we want to develop the habit of put your things away, check a bulletin board called a business center that's going to give you information about the day, and check your mailbox. And I'll explain what that is in just a moment. Then we'll help them organize a personal work folder with their assignments that day or that week. Return to an area, whether it's a desk, table, wherever it is you have assigned for them to sit, and begin to work in that folder. So now if we establish this as a habit or a routine, this would work whether you are in pre-K or in high school. So storing belongings, that's wherever you tell them to put their personal belongings. For some schools, the backpacks are by the desk. Other schools use cubbies. It's wherever you have designated a place for students to put up their belongings. But that's the first thing we want them to do. Put away your things, get your materials out of your backpack, ready to work, and then check the business center. The business center is just a bulletin board, and many of us already have some of these components in our classroom. But we want to organize all of the information about management on one bulletin board. That way, any student, parent, administrator, other teacher, anyone coming into that classroom would know to look at that business center, and it would be the outline of how activities will occur in that classroom that day, that week. Now, how this helps students? They come in, they put away their things, they check the business center, and they sign their name on this chart, which I'll explain more in just a moment how it works. And by the signing their name and seeing what group they are assigned to, whatever color, this one happens to be a second grade chart out of California. Then looking at the bottom, there are activities. A student can predict exactly what will happen to them that day. Then we have a daily schedule. Most teachers have a daily schedule, but our schedules are very explicit for how we use instructional time so that the students can look at that daily schedule, look at this rotation chart, and they immediately know how their day will go anytime during the day, morning or afternoon. A lot of teachers use a job chart so that we assign duties to students. Anything I don't want to do that doesn't pertain to instruction, I make up a funny title for it, and I assign a job chart. And my students usually work at that assigned job for 1 week at a time. We're going to talk more about each one of these in just a moment. But the business center is for management only. Nothing about instruction, nothing about content, vocabulary, words. But you're going to see some examples in a moment where the teachers have mixed a focus board on curriculum with their management information on a business center, and I'll talk you through that. Also, I often put a class roster or my attendance sheet for checking yourself in and out may be there. I may have directives for safety procedures on my business center bulletin board. I also put a list of assigned work partners or small groups for collaborative practice. And I often, for the older students, I often include a list of any critical due date, whether it is a rough draft or finished product or a homework assignment is due. So one look at this business center, I should be able to see who's in my group based on that grouping in the chart, the order of the activities, whether I'm going to be at the teaching table with a teacher or out on a workstation or collaborative practice. I can see what time those activities are going to occur in my daily schedule. If I have a job assignment that week, I would be able to see that. I would see everything I needed to know in terms of management. This helps tremendously, especially if you have a special education support person also trying to look at your schedule and schedule opportunities to work with students. So this is a copy of One Business Center, and what you see is they got the grouping chart. That's good. They've got the job chart over on the right. They've got their groups down on the bottom right, but what's missing on this one is the daily schedule. And that's critical because that tells the student what time to expect changes in activities. They can anticipate what time they work with the teacher using the daily schedule and these rotation charts. And they can see what time they get to work with their peers in collaborative practice. So it's a good idea, but the problem with this one, it also needs a daily schedule. So here's another business center, and you're going to see that the business centers vary in design, but they all operate the same. So what you're seeing here is a rotation chart that's a little bit different. They have a behavior matrix at the top. That is not something I typically use because once we get a rotation system going, the first thing teachers tell us is a significant decrease immediately in behavioral problems. I believe that's because they get their questions answered at the teaching table when they're in that teacher-led small group experience, and they get the sufficient instruction they need because the students are performing right in front of the teacher who's closely monitoring their progress and giving feedback at the point of need, so they get their questions answered, they get that help they need, and they get to use those skills in collaborative practice before they work independently. So you see that behavior problem go down, you see the disruptions for the teacher go down, and the system works. Now, what I would have done on this one, it also doesn't have a daily schedule. A daily schedule needs to be posted right beside the rotation chart. So here's some more. Now you see the daily schedule on the bottom photo to the right, but what you see is hourly blocks. And so what I would prefer to see on a daily schedule is I would like to see every 20 minutes, what are you doing in that classroom in the morning and in the afternoon if you're a full day classroom responsibility, because the block of 8 o'clock is math doesn't allow or encourage the students to be self-directed in what they do during that hour. So in the top left, you see the rotation chart, you see the job chart. What you're not seeing again is the daily schedule. If you want students to develop self-regulation behaviors, they need to know what to do and what time to do it. And that's why it's important to have that daily schedule nearby. This is, again, another business center. These are older students. And the reason that I know that is the teachers have assigned identification numbers instead of using their names. And you see this a lot in middle school and high school. Again, they're using the same rotation chart. They're using the job chart, but what's missing off of this business center, again, is the daily schedule so that they can see what time to perform. Again, this is another business center. Again, numbers are being used for identification of students' names. They've got the rotation system, even and the calendar. They've got the daily schedule, but they don't have the rotation system. So really you need to have all of those components side by side. These visual guides will help students develop self-regulation and responsible decision-making behaviors if you provide sufficient information. So now you're looking at one that has the rotation system. The students' names are up there individually with Velcro. To the left of that square rotation chart, you see the job chart. And to the right of the rotation chart, you see a daily schedule that's broken down into what the activity time periods will be that day. So the Business Center clearly communicates how activities are going to occur, and the daily schedule helps you know when the activities are going to occur. So the reason that the behavior problems significantly decrease is they know exactly when whole class group lessons are going to be occur. They know exactly what time small group activities will occur. The rotation chart shows them when the teacher will be working with a particular group, when groups are assigned to collaborative practice, and when groups are assigned to independent practice. So these routines must be established to manage this flexible grouping. So using a rotation system has a lot of benefits. Not only does it teach the students to assume the responsibility for their own regulation of participation, but it ensures that every student meets with the teacher in small groups every day if you're in elementary. In middle school and high school, they meet differently. They meet Monday and Wednesday, Tuesday and Thursday, and students that require more help come back on Friday. So even at middle school and high school, they are in the face of a teacher in small group with explicit instruction and differentiated feedback and instruction at the point of need, at least 2 to 3 times a week. So looking at this rotation chart, let me explain how it works. The top of the chart, and this is just a piece of poster board and everything's on it with Velcro. At the top of the chart, the colored squares just represent group names. And in a moment, you're going to see that there's some variation how different teachers use that. But basically, the groups, if you could imagine that group 1, which that would not be on the red square in my classroom, but I need it to explain to you how this relates to flexible grouping. If group 1 was my beyond grade level class, and then group 2 might be my on grade level small group, and group 3 might be my approaching small group, and group 4 would be my working below grade level group. And so I have them grouped homogeneously or similar skilled. The bottom of the chart, you can see teaching table, and that is small group teacher-led, explicit, differentiated instruction with feedback. Every grade level calls it teaching table, so that we have a label that everyone can communicate clearly, and it's explained to the students just by announcing this activity will be used at the teaching table. Students immediately know it will be likely new, it will be challenging. They are not to come to that table expected to know something. They are expected to come to that table ready to learn, ask questions for clarification, and receive immediate feedback to clarify their comprehension when they're learning something new. Then you see that there are 2 squares at the bottom for collaborative practice, and the third square is independent practice. Grouping doesn't matter on independent practice. Grouping matters for teaching table. You want it homogeneous so you can target that lesson. And then in collaborative practice, you want it to be mixed skill. So here's how it works. You would take students from group 2, which is assigned to collaborative practice right now, and you would assign them working partners from group 4, so that you can mix the skills in collaborative practice and they can help each other. Then the way that you rotate this chart is you start on the right where it says group 4. You remove that yellow square at the bottom of the chart on the right. Then you move each of them over in a clockwise position. So group 3 would go to collaborative practice. Group 2 would go to independent practice. Group 1 would go to collaborative practice, and group 4 then would be coming to the teaching table. And as you progress through the morning, you would continue rotating those the bottom of the chart to indicate where each group would go, And our small group times are usually around 15 to 20 minutes. Now that sounds like a short amount of time, but that's really supports what the cognitive research says for targeted explicit instruction for an adult is about 20 minutes, or your students are even younger than that. So this rotation chart is just poster board and Velcro, but it becomes the essential key that guides students through the activities. They see at the top who they will work with. They see at the bottom the order of their activities. So here are some rotation charts. The one on the left is obviously young pre-K and kinder. When they can't recognize their name, we use pictures. Chart operates the same. Notice we do not call it collaborative practice because they can't say that. We call it centers, but it's the same thing. It's an opportunity for them to be grouped with their peers, to self-regulate and practice what they have already been taught, either in whole group and it has come through the teaching table. So nothing in a center, nothing in collaborative practice would not be already introduced and familiar to the students. Work table in that chart means independent practice because kids that young can't work independently, so they typically do puzzles or some kind of project-based activity. The one on the right, you see that they are called work table. This teacher has rearranged their labels to be work table, workstation, teaching table, but it's just a mispositioning. It's the same operation. A group will be with the teaching table. Another two groups will be at workstations or collaborative practice, or they're sometimes called centers, and work table is called independent practice a lot. Here again, the same thing, different ones. I like having the names up there individually with Velcro. Just put a strip of Velcro back there, and because then you can do flexible grouping as you look at your data. Again, there's another one on the right. They're showing their groupings and where they're going. It's just a different. Rotations look different, but they operate the same. This would be a rotation chart at a high school where they're using the college campuses and icons to mark their groups, but they still operate the same. So a rotation chart needs to be placed next to a daily schedule, and the daily schedule needs to be broken down into 20 and 30-minute increments so that the students can look at the rotation chart and look at the daily schedule, and they work together. One tells them the time, the other one identifies the activity that the student will be participating in. Even our youngest children can follow this. In fact, we use this model with 3-year-olds all the way up through high school. So it's schedule on the left. They can't read time. They don't know time. So we use icons or pictures so that they can look at the daily schedule. We're trying to encourage even the youngest learner to assume the responsibility for regulating their own behavior and directing themselves through the day. So those are two daily schedules. Our middle school and high school schedules, like I mentioned, are slightly different. We group the kids the same. We use the same rotation chart, but you only meet at the teaching table Monday and Wednesday with 2 groups, Tuesday and Thursday, 2 groups. Now you've seen all the students in your class 2 times that week. And then on Friday, we call back students that have questions or need more assistance. So job chart, you can select any amount of jobs that you want or however many students you want to complete a job. Jobs are only completed during transitions in between activities, before something starts, after something starts. I usually assign about half of my class jobs the first week, and then half of my class, the other half, the second week. What are the rest of the kids doing if they don't have a job? They are working on their seat work. So helper charts can look however you want them to be. They look different in every classroom. We also want to establish routines and procedures for managing paper, where we turn something in, where we go to look for something. And you see in the middle of this picture the word mailboxes. Those are hanging file folders, and every student has a mailbox with their name on it or their number that's been assigned, or it may be the picture of their face if they can't understand it. We usually don't start the mailboxes until end of 4-year-old pre-K and kindergarten, but everything is returned to this area. The nice thing about that is at the end of the day, the teacher comes to this area and everything that you want to look at to monitor how your students are doing, it's located in one place. So mailboxes are different. Sometimes they're in the hanging file folder. Sometimes they're in boxes like this, but they operate the same. So students come in, they put their things away, they check the business center, they check their mail. Anything that is to be turned in, they deliver as mail. It's any paper assignment, any note from home, lunch pass, anything that's coming into school is delivered as mail into the mailbox. And anything that you may have put in their mailbox for seat work or a graphic organizer or whatever is put into the mailbox, then they retrieve that mail. So mailboxes look different, but they operate the same. Usually this is what we see, is hanging file folders, and we assign students as mailbox monitors. And so one mailbox monitor may have 6 students. That mailbox monitor gets the mailbox or the hanging file folder for the student. So the student would not go directly to the mailbox because we don't want a bunch of students going through them. They are assigned a monitor who will help them. Now, the reason I did that is to teach them to come under the authority of a peer. Because when they're working in small groups, I will have one of those students assigned as the team leader of that group. And I want all students to develop the habit of being honoring and respectful of the authority that I have assigned to another peer. So the mailbox monitor gives them practice in that, and they have to use those speaking and listening skills to ask for their mailbox and learn to wait and get their mailbox from their monitor. When they get their mail, they put it into what we call a do-done folder. It's a work folder. It's always kept in the mailbox when it's not in use. It never goes home. Work that goes home is transferred to a homework folder. All students have a do-done folder. It's in their mailbox. When they check their mail, they load up the papers in their do-done folder. If it pertains to something they need to do, it goes on the do side of the folder. As they complete their work, it is moved, they move it to the done side. So now we're teaching students to monitor their own progress in getting their work done. So they come in, put away their things, check the business center to see the order of their day, check their mail, and put their mail or their assigned papers or whatever in a do-done folder. Now they're ready to work. Older students, I put sometimes all of their paperwork for the week because I would have already taught it if it was going to be out in practice. I often complete my lesson plans 2 weeks at a time so that what I'm teaching 1 week, the students are in collaborative practice and independent practice working on previously taught instruction from the former week. And so I don't need to give any more directions. The system allows me to teach and them to practice either in collaborative practice or independent practice because they've already had instruction on everything that's put into a mailbox. So these are mailbox and do-done folders again. One of the things that you can use in your do-done folder that will help is this form of a graphic organizer. I developed this on a large chart in my classroom. Notice that it says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and in this particular one, there's an assignment due on Friday. What I do is when I'm making out my lesson plan, I create this graphic organizer and I list any of the big ideas, concepts, or key vocabulary words as I build this for Monday. Now, this helps me focus on what I will be teaching and reviewing every day so that I continually build on this information across the week, engage the students in collaborative conversations and discussions using these big ideas, and it also supports spelling when I ask them to write in response to text read or discussions in class. And so Monday, I would have my whole group lesson at the beginning, if you will, that introduction framing of the puzzle, and then I would quickly complete this Monday, the bubble of Monday on this graphic organizer, and have them quickly talk with a partner and slightly review, just 2 or 3 minutes, what the big ideas were based on my graphic organizer. Then on Tuesday, I would review Monday, and then I would do the same thing, have my whole class lesson. I would complete the graphic organizer for Tuesday. Same thing would happen on Wednesday. I would slightly review Monday, more review on Tuesday. So now what I'm doing is provided that repeated practice and that opportunity for students to engage in collaborative discussions using a structure or a text or print concept being the graphic organizer on the chart. At the end of the week, I would reproduce this chart, just take a picture of it with your phone and then print it, and every one of my students would have this graphic organizer the following Monday in their mailbox, and I would assign a lot of activities where this would support instruction, thinking, and discussion. This is another type of a student contract. All of these are available on a website that I'll provide for you at the end of this webinar. This is another form of a student contract. Honestly, the student contracts are just like we fill out a to-do list, only they're Monday through Friday. Older students, I put week 1 on the front of the paper, week 2 on the back, because I will have already provided all of the instruction before the week would have, or the assignments would appear on a student contract, because I'm teaching explicit instruction and guided practice before I would assign anything as written seat work, especially homework. So we also teach the students to monitor their completion. They put check marks when they finish something on their contract. They circle it. I can differentiate with my groups. I can circle and move things, exit off their contract, but all students get the same contract. This is a homework contract using the same concept. What I'm doing is I've already taught this content. It's not new, and now it's going to be assigned as homework. And so by providing a contract, now students who are involved in activities, athletics, have family things that need to be done, they can work ahead and be flexible and get their work on time. And this is, parents really enjoy that. And a lot of times for my homework contract, it is them reading and applying the skills that I am teaching in class. So they are reading a selection, a novel, something other than what I'm teaching, but applying the skills at home and writing in response to that text. So we designate that area for them to turn in work. I assign student monitors for different things that I want turned in, and that's what you're seeing on those clipboards. That monitor has been assigned 6 to 8 students, and they make sure that that student has turned in that assignment, or they're simply asking, do you need help? And if that monitor determines from that student they need help, the monitor writes me a note. This helps me because at the end of the day now, everything I want is on a shelf, and mine happens to be right by my business center where my mailboxes are, and inside my mailboxes at the end of the day are the due-done folders and the students' contracts. So I can quickly monitor my students' work. I can add a Post-it note with a comment if necessary, that routines and procedures are set for everything, including how we send work home. So across the week, work is in this mailbox. On Friday, students work with an assigned partner. They go through their work and organize it. For our kindergarten students, we just hope they can stack it. The older students starting in 4th and 5th grade, they organize that work chronologically and by subject area, and they review and discuss what they've learned with their partner, and they return that work packet organized back to either their mailbox, or some teachers have a take-home file. Notice at the bottom that kindergarten through second grade takes home a work packet only on Tuesday. Grades 3 through 5 take home a work packet on Thursday, and middle school and high school follow a similar pattern. So now our parents know exactly when to expect a packet of work. And we usually put the student's contract on top of that packet, and they can look through that packet, see where we're differentiating instruction, see our comments, because often I'll make a comment when I'm reviewing that packet. Remember, the students are going to organize the packet on Friday, but they don't go home until the earliest is the following Tuesday. So I have several days to look at that packet and make a comment so that I am communicating with home and to the student about work that's happened at school. So differentiating teaching and practice has these simultaneously occurring activities. There's that teaching table, that small group teacher-led instruction, and that's where you're going to introduce new content. You've introduced it as an overview in whole class, but now it's in small group. So what you introduce in whole class that morning is exactly what you're going to teach explicitly in that small group. And that's where we're going to use that on-grade level rigorous text and help students access meaning. And then other groups of students will be in assigned small groups in collaborative practice. It is previously taught content. It's already gone through the teaching table. I've addressed the major questions, and I don't grade that work because it's strictly purposed to enhance comprehension, and I want dialogue, so they are developing their oral language about the topic under discussion. And then some students are working in independent practice, and those activities would have already come through the teaching table and already come through the collaborative practice group, and then it goes to independent practice, and that's where I get my grades. So these orderly routines and procedures are going to help you manage differentiating instruction, because you have that opportunity to meet with students in small groups, closely monitor their progress, and give feedback at the specific time that they need it. And it allows you to monitor collaborative practice. So I can't encourage you enough to establish a classroom routine that works across all grade levels. From the moment they enter that door, they put away their things, they check that business center to determine how things are going to occur and what time that those activities will happen in a classroom. They check their mailbox, which is a hanging file folder. They deliver their mail or they receive their mail. They organize their due done folder. Then they go and start their work. That way you're not passing out materials during the day. You're not passing out or using dead time when a student comes in. They immediately start their work. And they keep that due done folder with them all day in every activity. So if they finish any activity that you've assigned in collaborative practice, or you get called away from your teaching table in emergency, they can immediately open their due done folder. They have something to do. And then at the end of the day, they turn that due done folder back into the mailbox. They transfer things to a homework folder. They bring that homework folder back the next day, and the whole process starts again. So the whole purpose is to establish predictable order so that the environment takes care of the behavior and the teacher focuses only on differentiating instruction. And this can be done so easily with these common classroom routines. So, Colleen, that's all I have for today. I would suggest if you're interested, you can go to that website, gha-pd.com. There are a lot of resources on that website that will help you, including rotation charts. And there's also a list called Getting Started, and that's not a to-do list. That is a suggestion of tips for you to meet with your colleagues and discuss what things would we start with, what do we think we're already doing, what's working, and what do we need to change. So, Colleen, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much. So now I want to turn it over to all of our attendees. As I said in the beginning of the call, we're going to be addressing any questions that you have. So if you have any questions for Dr. Gibson, feel free to type them into the the questions section in the right-hand panel. The first one that came in, Dr. Gibson, is do the students work on the same tasks both times that they are in collaborative practice, or should it be two separate tasks?
That depends on what you're working on, the skill or whatever. I would encourage teachers to assign fewer tasks, but more richer, deeper activities. So you're not going to expect them to finish that task in 15 minutes or 20 minutes if they're in that small group. So they do have that opportunity. But I will tell you, I strongly suggest also having students start their homework at school, and they will stay on task, because here's their choices. Work collaboratively with your peers or do it by yourself at home. And so if I'm not grading it, it's also in the mailbox and it's part of that folder. But they have all week, depending on what date you have assigned on that student contract to finish an activity. The students need to learn to begin to balance their use of time. And so starting at 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we allow more flexibility for the student to begin to plan how they use time, and we will give them numerous activities that with a due date on a contract.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I've only seen the one come through.
I think, Colleen, one of the biggest questions is this is an instructional shift that's very hard for us to make, because we are used to teaching something that morning and the students reading and writing about it that day. And I think one of the instructional shifts, if you want to see behavior problems go down and student work improve, is delay the time between when you introduce it and you're teaching it a couple of days, and not assign the written follow-up activity until the students have had more opportunity to work with you in small group and then in collaborative practice. They can write in collaborative practice, but it's a joint project type of writing. It's not independent responses that will be graded, that will be independent practice. So that shift in allowing students more time to receive teacher-led instruction and participate in collaborative practice is very different from what we've done in the past.
Great. I have a couple other questions that have just come in. How much time should there be to introduce a concept?
That again depends on the grade level and the difficulty of the concept, because I mean, the research on attention will say that younger kids basically can lock in to learn about 1 minute per chronological year, plus or minus 2 minutes. So that means if you're working with an 8-year-old, you've got a window of opportunity from about 6 to 10 minutes. And we often violate that because we think we have to teach through a lesson cycle. Really short, intense presentations of information are best. And then even an adult can only tolerate about 20 minutes of that kind of intense, explicit instruction. So you may have to pace out. If it's very, very difficult, you're going to have to put it in steps over a subsequent, 3 days or something.
Great. Is it the independent practice where a teacher gets grades? When do we allow time for the assessment?
I do a lot of my assessments at the teaching table because I can see clearly where a student's skill set breaks down. And I can't see that when I give it as a whole class assessment, because I can closely monitor and determine where that struggle hits, because that's where I've got to do the repair work for the instruction. And so I tend to set aside the teaching table time, and I actually give the assessment. Now, if it's mandatory that you have to, by your district, give it as a whole class, well, then you're going to still have whole class opportunities in between these rotations. Even if you had 4 activities, 4 rotations, and they were only 20 minutes long. That's just 80 minutes of your morning. So you still can, on your daily schedule, put in 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. You can adjust that daily schedule easily. It's just the rotation chart demonstrates when certain groups are going to a certain activity, like the teaching table or collaborative practice. There's a lot of information on our website that would help explain this. In an hour, it's hard to explain the whole system, but they can look on the website. There's a lot of downloadable resources to help. Or they can email me or you, and I can explain it further.
Great. So that was the last question that came in. I will say that we will be sending an email follow-up with the from the session that will include a link to this recording so that you can listen to it again. I know it's a lot of information, so as Vicki said, there's a lot of additional information on her website as well. So we'll be sending this out so you can review it and share it with your colleagues. So look for that email from us. And we thank you all for attending the webinar today. As you exit the webinar, there will be a survey that will open, and we would love your feedback to help us improve and plan for future webinars. If we did not get to your question today, or if you have another follow-up question afterwards, feel free to email webinars@mheducation.com. Again, that's webinars@mheducation.com. And thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Colleen. Bye-bye.